Hello and welcome to Fidelity Next, our webcast that helps you get to the next level of your career. I'm your host, Tamara Radachai. Today we're continuing our Ask a Recruiter series, exploring how to approach an interview in the tech space. From navigating technical jargon to standing out in a highly saturated market, today's tips are for those in IT, technology, software development, and beyond, looking to make the next move in their careers. Here with us to walk us through it is Ingrid Santoso, recruitment consultant. If you have any questions for us during the show, please drop them in the comments and we'll get back to you after. Ingrid, welcome to Fidelity Next.
Thank you for having me. Definitely excited for our conversation today.
Me too. So before we dive into everything, you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Fidelity?
Yeah, for sure. So Ingrid, been here for almost 6 years now. I was, the first recruiter to join as, dedicated to technology recruitment specifically. And since then, we've grown to, a few other recruiters that are kind of, helping be that support system when it comes to recruitment. And, the types of roles that we hire for, they're quite vast. We start off being not known for technology recruitment, which people usually think we're a financial industry. We just hire for financial analysts or sales reps. That's not really the case. We've grown significantly over the past recent years, just given the development of the company itself. But just some examples of some technology, jobs that we are recruiting for in the last little bit. Software developers. There's many different types of software developers. Not only full stack developers, we have Salesforce developers, Appian, and so forth. We also hire for testers, also known as QA analysts, BAs, business analysts, different types of architects too, cloud, data, technical. You might not be too familiar with it, but that's okay. And we also hire for desktop support. So I'm sure that, time and time again, we forget our passwords. So they're definitely the ones there to help and support us, as well as, cybersecurity that helps with, a lot of training. And those are just a couple of roles that we hire for, but it's nice to see that we're continuing to build teams, build that momentum when it comes to the staying on top of innovation at Fidelity.
I mean, like you said, I think no matter what industry we're in, we're all tech companies at this point, right?
Yeah.
So there's always that side of the business that needs to keep everything running on the back end. So yeah, really exciting, and I'm sure growing every day.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So today we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna do a bit of a role play simulation of an interview, and I'm gonna ask you common questions that are asked in interviews. We're gonna start things off a little bit more general and then move into more tech-specific questions. And then if you can give us the best way to answer those questions if you are a candidate in an interview.
Yeah, for sure, sounds good.
All right, so let's start the interview off. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so, I would say this is a great way to storytell your experience. And it definitely varies if you're more junior or more tenured within your career. So if you're more tenured, I would say definitely be more concise, because someone who has 20 years of experience, we don't have a lot of time to get through, everyone's experience there, but definitely group your experience. So say, for example, you could say the first 10 years of my career, I was a developer. In the past 5 years, I'm an architect, right? And breaking it down, okay, right now we're looking for an architect, break down your responsibilities, tech stack, with databases, platforms, different cloud technologies you're experienced with. If you're more junior, definitely take it a little bit slower. Providing experience of type of projects you worked on during your schooling. And then, if you've done any co-ops or internships, being able to provide what type of projects you worked on. I always would focus on, highlighting what the requirements are for that job within your experience. So if that be different technologies that you use, the types of projects, the type of people you're meeting with. So definitely, be able to provide that intel for us. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of like our first impression of candidates. So you want to make sure that, they're able to not only provide that storytelling, but able to, help us understand who you are.
Great.
Yeah.
And why are you interested in this role?
So, also a good question. It's always mixed between, well, this is the job I dream of having. This is where I want to take my next skill set. That could be, maybe enhancing their skill set, being able to be exposed to maybe, more stakeholders, more on that business side. So whatever really kind of sticks out to you and resonates with you, definitely be able to answer that. And then also, I always suggest talking about a little bit more about the company itself, why you're interested in Fidelity, for example. It could be anywhere between, the culture, our values, about, innovation as well, We are one of the leaders in the industry. So being able to highlight that, it just really shows us that you've done your research about the company, you know what we do. We are not a bank, so make sure you definitely do your research there. Yeah.
Great. And this is a really big question. I know, very common in interviews. How do you handle ambiguity or competing deadlines?
Yes. So actually, one of my favorite questions. We're able to really understand, how someone's able to problem solve, how they critically think too, and we deal with ambiguity during work, personal lives as well. Personal lives, in terms of, say, for example, if you're a parent, you ask your child to take out, meat from the freezer, and they did it, and now you have to figure out what to make for dinner, right? So, being able to understand, okay, like what was the steps to figure out the unknown, right? Was it you that went to find out the information? So, for example, if you're thrown on a project where you had to learn a new tool and maybe the team was busy and was able to show you guidance, what did you do from there? Was there any sort of previous documentation you're able to look at? Were there any sort of courses that you're able to take on the side? Do you reach out to your team members or other stakeholders to gather that information? So it's really being able to, distinguish how you kind of step by step were able to provide that information. And I always suggest, with all these questions, being able to answer with a project. So before you interview, try to think about, maybe 2 or 3 projects that definitely resonate with you, and then you could kind of bounce from those different projects to answer your questions.
And this is always sort of a question at the end of an interview, but what questions do you have for me?
Yes. So as recruiters, we tend to get the standard, what does the first 3 or 6 months look like? And how is that measured? So we do often get that a lot, which is, a great question. But sometimes, it's nice to see candidates asking maybe more specific questions to the job. So for example, what does my day-to-day look like? What responsibilities will I learn in the first, couple of months? Is there any sort of, pain points the team is facing? Any sort of, projects are upcoming? Any sort of technologies that are being introduced? So being a little bit more specific, it just kind of also shows the grasp of what you know about the role itself.
That's a great segue into the next question, which we're getting more into the tech-specific side of things.
Okay.
So what technologies are you most comfortable working with?
Yes. So this can be a tricky one because sometimes, especially if you're, depending on your career level, you might just kind of, almost vomit all these technologies and tools that you're experienced with. But when it comes to, really going back to the job posting, understand the requirements for the role, right? So for example, if we're looking for, a Salesforce developer, maybe mention technologies like Salesforce, right? And other, complementary technologies too. And if there's, technology and tools that maybe you're not too familiar with, or you have a little bit of knowledge, definitely highlight that as well, saying, I don't have maybe hands-on experiences or as in-depth experience. Maybe mentioning tools where they are quite similar to each other, right? So for example, one could be yes, I have experience with Tableau, but it's very relatable to Power BI because they're both data visualization tools. So being able to complement those as well. But I always recommend being honest when it comes to tools and technologies because that might be kind of probed into a little bit more during the interview. So best way to kind of share what you're comfortable with at the beginning.
I'm sure a part of that too is knowing how the different platforms work with each other, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah. How they flow together, how they're connected, all of that.
Great. And how do you approach debugging or troubleshooting a tech issue?
Yeah, so another good one. A lot of technology professionals deal with this on a regular basis. It's also there's 2 parts of it, I would say. One is understanding the technical part of it and understanding the communication part of it. So first of all, how were you able to, I guess, realize there was a mistake, right? So kind of putting that, again, problem-solving hat on. What were the steps to try to resolve it? So for example, did you reach out to the immediate stakeholders that would be affected by, this issue? Being able to, understand who you reached out to when this issue. Were you the one who actually put your best foot forward to try to fix it? So we like to understand how eager and driven someone is to try to kind of actually fix a problem rather than kind of, throwing their hands up and passing over to another team member, which is not, not always bad, but how are you able to kind of try to work on it yourself, right? Also shows it kind of that independence. And from a communication perspective, even if, say, this was the mistake of the candidate, that's okay. We learn from mistakes all the time. So being able to, raise your hand up, being like, I'm sorry, I made a little boo-boo. This is what I'm doing to try to fix it. but even able to kind of communicate what the issue was. It was your mistake, but this is how we're trying to fix it.
Great. And how do you handle root cause analysis after an outage or issue?
Yes, another good one, because we always want to make sure it doesn't happen again
Mhm.
or is repeated in the future. For this one, it's almost, again, putting on a different hat this time, investigator hat, trying to figure out, what caused it, of course. So really going back into the documentation, right? Being able to go, if you're a coder, deep into the code and understanding why this happened. A lot of the times, if it's not the employer, if it's kind of, someone else, being able to understand how we're able to not have it happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're able to, what we look for is very detailed individuals, especially if it's like a developer, right? Because we need to be detailed in day-to-day work, but being able to understand, okay, this is what happened. How can we, prevent this from happening again? And being able to kind of document that information and also, again, communicate, right? Sharing with the team, this is what happened. If you need to train the team members as well, it's kind of another hat you get to put on. So there's many different ways to answer this. Again, I would provide another example, detailed example, trying to highlight, how you're able to kind of find that root cause.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is really important for tech people. Can you explain a technical concept you've worked on in simple terms?
Yes, this is, I do enjoy this question because sometimes the hiring manager or someone who's more technical will ask this, or sometimes I would. When it's the hiring manager ask it, the candidate definitely gets more detailed and technical, which is great, showcases their knowledge. And then sometimes when I ask the question, they really break it down for me, which I find is very helpful just to understand how they're able to converse technical to non-technical and vice versa. So again, providing an example, I do understand where sometimes developers, maybe they don't sit closely with the business or having those interactions, but if it's interacting to a team lead, team manager, or a business analyst who definitely sits as a middle person, being able to kind of break down those terms. And we're not only, wanting to learn how you communicate, but are you able to comprehend the information the business is trying to, present to you, right? So you actually know, this is what we need to accomplish.
And how do you prioritize multiple incidents or support requests?
Yes, another good question. I think it kind of stems through all levels within someone's career, how you're able to really multitask. It also, again, shows what you know about what the business needs at that time. And if you don't, that's okay. Being able to raise your hand and being like, hey, like, what is priority? What can you do to help me kind of reprioritize? And again, being able to understand what is important to the business. So sometimes that could be reaching out to your manager or, maybe a project manager to understand, okay, like, can you help me define that? And then being able to kind of, juggle that too. And so I know a lot of times we do work within Agile, so it could be quite fast. So be able to juggle and showcase how you're able to, manage multiple demands.
This is sort of a two-part question, but can you describe a project you've built end-to-end or a project that you're proud of?
Yeah, so, I guess I'll start project you're proud of. And this doesn't always have to be a success story. It could be maybe a project where, it failed maybe a couple times before it got pushed out. But, what I like to understand is the project itself and why that's the interest of the candidate. It kind of piques interest in terms of, was there a new technology that you're able to learn? Were you able to get more in front with, business stakeholders? It kind of really understands what, where the candidate is and where they want to be in their next, career journey. And project end to end, of course, another good example where you're the one owning the project or the initiative. Who were you speaking to? How were you able to gather business requirements and how were you able to really strategic plan step by step in that project? It shows organization skills, how you're able to prioritize. Of course, wear multiple hats too, especially if you're kind of owning that project itself. And at the end, like, how are you able to kind of present and maybe potentially train other individuals?
And how do you stay current with evolving technologies?
Yes, so we can't really pinpoint how many new AI technologies have emerged, ever since the last couple of years. Being able to stay current is something that we're always looking for. We like to understand candidates of how they stay current, if that's being able to take different courses online, being able to, understand if they're kind of keeping up with what's happening in the market. And I do understand it changes very rapidly. So of course you can't be on top of everything all at once. But are there different webcasts or podcasts that you're kind of engaging with, any sort of pages or newsletters too? Here at Fidelity, we're continuing to evolve and innovate. And so being able to find those individuals who match what we're looking for and kind of helping take the company to the next step and continue to be one of the leaders in the market. So definitely highlight, all those materials that you utilize.
Another really important one, I think. How do you work with non-technical stakeholders?
Yes, exactly. This comes again, it kind of relates to, the last question we have about, understanding the business. Some roles, again, they might not, work directly with the business itself, but if you're able to really digest and comprehend what the business is asking, it definitely will take you a long way. So being able to, sit with them, sit in the meetings, definitely take notes. Provide an example where you're able to kind of distinguish with a manager or team leader, project manager who has it, and it's sometimes even asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If we rather have someone clarify information as many times that they need than working on something that's completely wrong. But definitely be able to kind of provide that insight too. And also I would suggest as a recruiter, we're biased, but try to kind of break it down for the recruitment team also to understand. We don't know all the technical jargon as much as we want to, but being able to break it down. And it also gives us a good sense of how you're actually able to communicate to non-technical individuals.
Like, what problem is this solving, right?
Exactly.
And you really dive deep.
Exactly, yes.
So I think that's the end of the actual interview process here, but a few more questions about actual interviews and kind of how we approach the process.
Yeah, for sure.
How are candidates' technical skills assessed during the recruitment cycle?
Yes, we get asked this on a regular basis. So typically during the end of the phone screen, the recruiter will guide the candidates next steps of how the recruitment cycle will flow. And it also really does depend on the position itself. So sometimes it might be, we send an assessment after the phone screen just to kind of assess their technology. So this could be, a quick coding sample, for example, or multiple choice, just for them to understand, okay, this is what we're looking for. Do you understand those basics, right? Another assessment that we do is sending over a case study. So a case study about a couple of days before the interview, where individuals are able to kind of almost crack the code in a sense and present their findings during that interview. And then lastly, sometimes you almost do kind of like a live coding test where, towards the end of the interview, the recruiter may send over like an assessment to your email, and on the spot, we give them 20 to 30 minutes to actually solve that problem, and then send it over to us, before the interview ends. And so, again, there's many different ways. We try to be creative as much as we can, and of course, during that interview, either the manager or someone senior in the team are able to ask more questions, do a deeper dive. What are the fundamentals, for example, of Appian? What can you do with it, and so forth.
And I know it's becoming way more common for people to use AI in these types of scenarios, right? Like when they're in the interview, using those tools to sort of help them or cheat, so to speak. Is it obvious when someone's doing that?
Yes, and the reason why I say that is because you're meeting with individuals who've been in their career and been doing this day in, day out for 10, 15, 20 years. And so they definitely know. It's basically, for example, like Microsoft Access, right? We may ask a question about, what's your experience? Do you know what to do in X, Y, Z? But maybe the AI tool that someone's using kind of picks up Access in a different meeting, right?
Yeah.
Which we've had happen before. But we definitely know. And so, I definitely suggest individuals kind of maybe leaving it to the side. And I think also we need to kind of reprogram our brain a little bit where AI is not going to do all of our work for us, personal lives and professional lives. It's here to really complement and enhance our work, really, right? So we definitely know. Even during the resume screening, we could, tell, not always, but we can tell, right? Sometimes the way it's worded doesn't flow right. Or if someone has an experience with, a specific technology, it's not really highlight of how they use that technology. Or sometimes individuals just copy the responsibilities from the job posting and actually post it into their resume. So we're able to figure it out. But yes, we have been dealing with that, as so as many other companies as well.
Yeah, so you know.
Yes, I've
We
been
should
there.
definitely use our own brains when we're, right,
Exactly.
approaching an interview.
It's more authentic, I would find.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So the tech space is highly competitive. I'm sure you get more applications than any other area.
Yes.
What's a consideration for someone, trying to penetrate this industry and get through all the clutter of all the different
Yeah.
applications? What's your advice there?
Yeah, really trying to break through.
Mm-hmm.
It's it can be very tricky. Some of our developer roles we get over 1,000 applications, right? And we definitely do filter it manually. And so the best way, again, is really catering each resume to that specific job. I know it's a lot of work, but it definitely goes a long way. So for example, if we're looking for a full stack developer, being able to indicate what tools you have, also indicate how were you able to use that tools, like was it during a project, and so forth. So definitely catering it to each each position itself. I also suggest if you're writing a cover letter, make sure that's catered to being able to really highlight your experience. And also just kind of continuing to learn as well. If you have a gap in your resume, that's okay. What are you doing to kind of enhance your skills, and how are you able to kind of grow during that off time?
So if you can give us one major takeaway from today's discussion, what would that be?
Yeah, for sure. So during just the recruitment process in general, again, trying to be concise when providing your answers, especially when it comes to different projects that you've been a part of as well. Being able to kind of, I guess, showcase your tools experience with the projects that you've been a part of and how you used it. Also, be, try to be resilient as you can. The market, can be quite tough at times. Being resilient, focus on your resume. And one thing also is just really, don't focus on the trend of what can be, what's kind of big on the market right now. Try to continue to evolve and grow. So keep learning and, keep practicing.
Well, thank you so much. This is great advice for anyone, I think, in this industry, or maybe not even in this industry. Lots of transferable skills here. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks to everyone for joining us on today's episode of Fidelity Next. If you want to catch a replay of this episode, you can find it on Fidelity Canada's YouTube channel under the Fidelity Next playlist. There you'll also find past episodes covering a number of topics, including even more recruiter insights. If you're curious about a career at Fidelity, you can explore our open roles at careers.fidelity.ca. Thanks again for joining the discussion today, and we'll see you on the next episode.